All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you've had a great week. I've had a pretty good one myself. I hope you've already done the reading on chapter 6, but if you have not, you can just hop in here, look at the highlighted parts, and then pay extra special attention to those when you're going through the reading yourself this week before you take the quiz and participate in the discussion forum. So with that being said, we're just going to go ahead and launch right into it as I share my screen with you so you can follow along on the PowerPoint. All right. Chapter 6, Communication and Culture. So for chapter 6, we're going to define and explain culture and its impact on your communication styles. We're going to delineate important ways that cultural variables affect communication. We're going to describe the communicative power of group affiliations. We're going to explain key barriers to intercultural communication. And finally, we are going to demonstrate behaviors that contribute to intercultural competence. All right, so something that's really important for us to know about culture is that culture is learned. This is a learned system of thoughts and behaviors that belongs to and typifies a relatively large group of people. It's the composite of a person's shared beliefs, values, and practices, and your personal worldview is made up of the framework through which you interpret the world and the people in it. So your worldview is different than anybody else's worldview because it's based on the way that you were raised, the shared beliefs of your family and friends that you grew up with. So everybody has a different world through which, everybody has a different lens through which they see the world. Culture is expressed through communication. So we use communication to express culture, and culture affects the way we see others' communication. An example of this could be, for example, in a culture, it could be rude to make eye contact with elders, whereas in my culture, it was rude if I didn't make eye contact with someone that I was talking to. So culture affects the way we see others' communication and the way we perceive it. Intercultural communication matters. Communication between people from different cultures who have different worldviews is the definition we're going to be using for this class. It's absolutely necessary in our very diverse, very mobile society. We are more mobile than we've ever been. We can get across the world on a plane in a day, less than a day if we wanted to. Mediated interactions, so interactions through Skype, texting, through email, through FaceTime, through Zoom, through any kind of mediated interactions, and diverse organizations provide regular exposure to people from other cultures that we might not have had before these technological advances. There are 7 cultural variations that play out along a spectrum, and we're going to be talking about 7 of them. We're only going to be talking about seven of them. There are tons of other different cultural variations, but these are the ones we're going to focus on today. So we're going to talk a little bit about high context and low context cultures. So high context cultures use contextual cues to both interpret meaning and send subtle messages. High context cultures rely mainly on nonverbal implicit communication. They rely on deep personal messages or deep personal relationships, context, and traditions to interpret messages. A couple of these countries include Japan, China, France, Spain, Brazil, and there are several others that really imply on these implicit communication styles. And then low context cultures use direct language and rely less on situational factors. So they rely less, it's a lot more explicit, the expectations, the values, when interacting in these communication styles. There's not a lot of unspoken expectations. They're a lot more explicit when you're communicating with somebody. Another one is the collectivist versus individualistic orientations. So collectivist cultures perceive themselves as a member of a group and communicate from that perspective. So typically in these cultures, we see family come first. You are a member of the community first and foremost, and you will serve them before you serve yourself. And typically in these cultures, we see people not moving out of their parents' house until they get married, as opposed to what I grew up with here in the United States, where like the expectation was I would move out when I turned 18. I would fly the coop. I would move on. And individualistic cultures, like in my experience, are value individuality, communicate autonomy and privacy, and downplay emotions pretty often. So again, one of the big examples, or a really good example of this, would be someone staying at home until they got married, or versus someone moving out when they turned 18. Because what you do in a collectivist culture really just puts the group, prioritizes the group over prioritizing the self. And individualistic cultures typically value the self over the group. Comfort with uncertainty. So some cultures, uncertainty avoidance deals with the society's tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. It ultimately refers to man's search for truth, and it indicates to what extent a culture programs its members to either feel comfortable or uncomfortable in unstructured situations. So high uncertainty avoidance, so people that avoid uncertain situations, or cultures that avoid uncertainty adapt behavior to avoid risk and use formal rules to communicate. Whereas low uncertainty avoidance, so cultures that have higher tolerance for ambiguity, use fewer formal rules when communicating. It's the difference between being comfortable with structure and knowing how an interaction is going to happen. And some cultures avoid uncertainty more than others. And typically, when you are a part of a culture that doesn't like uncertain situations, your anxiety levels go up when you're faced with those kinds of situations. Masculine and feminine orientations, this one's pretty straightforward. Masculine cultures place value on assertiveness, achievement, ambition, and competitiveness, where we see in feminine cultures, they place value on nurturing, relationships, quality of life. That one's pretty straightforward. And then approaches to power distance. So power distance, high power distance, people with less power accept a lower position as a basic fact of life in high power distance cultures. And in low power distance cultures, people tolerate less difference in power between people and communicate with those in higher statuses with less anxiety. So basically what that means is, an example of this is a high power distance family. You are never going to talk back to your mom. You're never going to talk back to your your grandparents, your grandfamily. And you're never going to blatantly disobey them. You're never going to question their authority because there's a high power distance, and you will likely be disciplined if you do. With a low power distance, people can typically question authority without as much anxiety. So like I grew up in a low power distance family where I constantly questioned my dad, and I probably should have been punished for it, but I wasn't, because my dad allowed me the access to be able to question him and argue with him and debate with him in a way that I didn't have to be anxious about it. So lower power distance, you have less anxiety communicating with authority. And this can happen in a lot of different places. Some workplaces have really high power distance between boss and employees. Some colleges have really high power distance between professors and students. So power distance is definitely what you make it. Every professor, every parent, or every boss has a different style in which they like to communicate in their classroom or in their home. And there are things that we can do to increase power distances. Sometimes we increase power distances by using higher language to seem further away. Or sometimes we increase power distance, professors sometimes increase power distance by dressing very formally to seem far further removed from the classroom situation. So there are things that you can do to increase and decrease your power distance. I'm just wearing a t-shirt, low power distance. I'm using more common language, lower power distance. But different people have their own different style, and power distance is something that's definitely important to be aware of when interacting with different cultures. All right, time orientation. So monochronistic cultures are time conscious. Time is a valuable resource. You're never late. Time is money, and you being late is wasting someone's time, and it's incredibly disrespectful. You don't show up late. But in polychronistic cultures, they have a more fluid approach to time. They deal with various projects and various people simultaneously. In polychronistic cultures, it's okay to close your business a couple hours early because you had a family thing to deal with. It's okay to get to work a little bit late. It's okay to show up to a party a couple hours late. It's not received as offensive because these cultures don't see time that way. They see it as something that's more fluid. All right, the value of emotional expression. So collectivist cultures typically, not always, we don't like absolutes in this class. Collectivist cultures may use hyperbole when describing situations or things that have vivid and colorful language and use a lot of great emotional intensity. Whereas individualistic cultures tend to understate and use euphemisms to downplay emotional intensity. For example, I keep giving examples about myself. I'm so sorry. But like in my family, growing up, like we always just had conversations, and if we had feelings about it, we would process those on our own. We wouldn't really talk about them, but we'd talk about like things that we could fix in the future. Whereas like my friend's family growing up, when they had a fight, they talked about their emotions, even if they were fiery, and it was vivid and there was a lot of emotion present, and they didn't really shy away from that. So there are just a lot of differences with how people handle conflict in their different cultural styles or the different cultural contexts. All right, co-cultural communication. We talked a little bit about this one. I think maybe chapter 1, could be chapter last week. But co-cultural communication is when members share some of the general culture's system of thought and behaviors, but have a distinct unifying characteristic. This can include race, gender, sexual orientation, religion. It can include generations like the millennials, the boomers, Gen Z. And then co-cultures exist or can exist within a larger culture. So I talked about car culture a little bit before. So like car culture, like you could be a car person, but you could be into BMWs, or you could be into, I don't know, like off-roading vehicles. There's so many co-cultures that exist within the larger culture of car culture. Same thing with the United States. Like the United States is a culture, and then there are all these different co-cultures, like different race, genders, sexual orientations, religions, and then we could just even boil it down to generations, and there are tons more. But co-cultures are definitely something that are really cool to be aware of, because we not only do we identify with our co-cultures, but we identify with the culture in which we exist or grew up in as well. All right, social identity theory. So social identity theory, but just basically states that a person's sense of identity or a person's sense of who they are comes from your group memberships. So whatever groups you're a part of, that helps develop your sense of self and your social identity. So the groups you identify with. So if you identify with a group, you probably, I don't know, what's a group? You are Buddhist, and you identify as Buddhist, and that is your social identity. And you can have a million more, you're not limited to just one, but those are your group memberships, and those help develop the way that you think about yourself. And then with these groups, there are the in-groups and the out-groups. So the in-group would be the us, the out-group would be the them, right? So the in-group would be, I don't know, I'm a student. The in-group is I'm a student, and the out-group would be everyone that isn't a student. So there are all these different in-group, out-groups, cultures, and the groups that you're a part of, so the in-group, and the groups that you're not a part of, so you'd be part of the out-group. And then intergroup communication. So how communication occurs within and between groups and affects relationships. Group identification and communication shifts depending on which group member has made salient or is made salient at a given moment. So anxiety is one of the biggest intercultural communication challenges. The more positive intercultural experiences we have, the more confident we are and the more competent we feel at communicating with other cultures. The more negative experiences we have interacting with other cultures, the more anxiety we have about these interactions, right? So the more positive experiences you have, the cooler, the more comfortable you are, but the worse experiences you have, the more anxiety you have. So ethnocentrism is a really important term for this class for us to understand, and it's the belief in the superiority of your own culture or group. So viewing other cultures through your own lens and thinking yours is better than theirs. So when you have an air of superiority, or you think your group is better than everybody else's, you're probably a little bit ethnocentric about your group. Discrimination. So discrimination is definitely a really important term for us to talk about. It's something that's definitely a hot button topic right now in the United States. Discrimination, for the purposes of our class, is going to be described as a behavior towards a person or a group based solely on their membership of a particular group, class, or category. So attitudes about superiority of one culture lead to rules and behaviors that favor that group and harm another group. So when we're talking about discrimination, we can talk about like the pink tax. Like we can talk about women not getting paid as much as men. We can talk about the prison industrial complex and how there are far more people of color incarcerated based on the percentage that are present in the United States. Discrimination is something that's super important for us to be aware of, and super important for us to constantly be checking our internal biases, constantly be questioning ourselves, like, why do I believe that? Where did I learn that? And unlearning those things along the way so we can be better people and we can see other people from other countries and other cultures in a way that is not negative, in a way that is not inherently participating in discrimination. Okay, so improving intercultural communication. We do this through a number of steps. So we're going to engage in cognition. We're going to think about this. We're going to develop more complex ways of thinking about culture. We are going to start thinking about the way we were raised in our own culture and how that may contrast, or how that may be different from the way someone else was raised. But that doesn't make your way or their way right or wrong. It's just different. Affect, feelings. Feeling less anxious and feeling more comfortable about intercultural experiences. And we know we're only going to feel less anxious the more we interact with different people of different cultures, with different cultures themselves, by trying new things and by having these positive experiences. Behavior, actions. Develop better interpersonal relationships. Step out of your comfort zone. Go to a restaurant whose food you've never had before that's different than the country of your own or the culture of your own. Like, try new things, make new friends, go places. I mean, not right now, stay safe, pandemic, like, please, please, please stay safe. But like, once this is all past, like, go to places, try new things, do not be scared. Mindfulness, being fully present in the awareness and the cultural intergroup aspects of the situation. Have intercultural sensitivity, understand that their upbringing may be totally different than your own, and be empathetic to that, be understanding of that. If someone accidentally offends you, or if you accidentally offend someone, be open, be willing to admit mistakes, and be willing to talk about it, most of all. Openness to other cultures, a willingness to understand and appreciate the different cultural aspects. Like I said, just because it's not the way that you did it or you were raised doesn't mean it's necessarily right or wrong. But just being willing to hear other people and understand where they came from, and being open to these new experiences is absolutely a necessary step in this process. Okay, intergroup contact. We're going to talk just briefly about intergroup contact theory. And intergroup contact theory states that interaction between members of different social groups generates a possibility for more positive attitudes. And if we have more positive attitudes, we have more interactions. We have more positive interactions, and we're more willing to step into those interactions and have those positive experiences. Appropriate accommodation. Convergence involves shifting language or nonverbal behaviors towards each other's way of communicating. So once you know how someone else communicates, like modifying the way you communicate to like meet them halfway and have them meet you halfway if you have different communication styles. It's just about reaching a mutual understanding. What we do want to avoid is over accommodation or going too far and making changes based on a stereotype and about another people group, right? So like, if you see an example of over accommodation would be like if you see an elderly person on the side of the road and you just assume that they have bad hearing because they're elderly and you start yelling at them, like don't do that. Like, don't be like, hi, do you need help? Like interact with them like a person, like meet them where they're at, avoid over accommodation. And if they need you to speak up, then speak up, right? But we're not going to assume that like the entire elderly community can't hear very well. So practice using your skills, listen effectively, think before you act or speak, be empathetic, do the right thing, and be open to experiencing other cultures fully and without judgment. So, that being said, that is our lecture on communication and culture. I hope you all have a great week, and I'm very much looking forward to our next Zoom meeting. We don't have one scheduled yet, but we'll probably do one soon just to try to field any questions you all might have on all of the chapters we've gone over so far. I am lucky to be teaching you this semester. Please reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye.